Welcome to Therate. We're here to provide a therapist perspective on Taylor's musical mental health themes. We are not therapy, but we hope you enjoy your conversation. Our conversation.
It is our conversation.
I'm just going to leave that in because you know what? It's okay not to be perfect. So we're here to talk about the Fortnite music video, and I had a couple of thoughts. One of them was about the mental hospital that's like portrayed in the beginning. So obviously it's like a very distorted view of like,
hmm
because there's like a bed up high and there's like all of these things kind of around. So it's very distorted. Um, but she's like handcuffed to the bed and she's in a wedding dress, which there's so much imagery here that we could get into as Swifties. But I was curious about like the misconceptions that people have of mental hospitals sometimes and like how that can affect people's view of that. I'm not going to sit here and say it's like a vacation or a great time or somewhere that you would probably like decide to go for fun. But it can provide some good help. And so I had this tension of like, I'm a Swiftie and I love what Taylor's doing with this imagery, and I'm a therapist and I don't love what Taylor's doing with this imagery. So I was kind of like holding
Mm.
that tension and I wanted to talk that through with you.
Yes, yes. So let's start with like what you really did like about it.
Yeah. So I loved like all of the Swiftie things, right? Because she's in a wedding dress. She's clearly like, people have called her crazy so many times. And so she's like, okay, if I'm crazy, I must be so crazy that I'm like going to a mental hospital. But
hmm
I don't love that like visual or like I understand what Taylor's doing and I think it's okay for her to do that, just to be clear. But as a
hmm
therapist, I'm like, okay, but sometimes like mental hospitals are really necessary and are it's not being portrayed accurately. And so a little bit about me was like I just felt uncomfortable with it.
Yes, yes. So I think like what I'm hearing you say is that like artistically you approve of like what she was doing. Like especially when you know Taylor's history, when you know the Swiftie lore, like you can watch that video and be like, oh, the symbolism and the imagery is very rich and it's very apparent to somebody who's a pretty thorough fan. Like you know the history more than just the music. Um, and if you just take it at face value, is she kind of making a mockery in some ways? Now, that's my word, not yours, but of mental institutions. Is she twisting this idea of like kind of reinforcing this sterile hospital environment where you're like truly quote unquote crazy, which we don't like that word in therapy at all, but
Yeah,
like, is it reinforcing some toxic narratives?
right. Right. And again, like we talked about hyperbole with the song of Fortnight. So like it makes so much sense why she chose to do this and like the move on drug. I think the drug literally says like get over him. When
Yes, yeah, yeah. It looks like a sweet tart candy. You just like put it in her
yeah,
mouth. It
exactly.
probably was, honestly. She's like, make it sugar, please.
So I just wanted to note that and like talk about it. It didn't feel right to talk about just the song without including the music
hmm
video when it talks about a mental hospital. And then Katie, I think you're gonna love this. The scene with the typewriters. Can you picture this when like Posty is over here and
Yes,
then Swifty is over here? Posty and
yes.
Swifty. Okay, and then each one of their typewriters has a different color.
Wait, it's a
As
different
they're
color. I don't think I noticed that.
So as they're typing, a different color starts like floating up.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Like that, like the smoke color or whatever. Yes,
Yes. Yep. And then it mixes in the middle.
yes.
Okay, I'm reading a book called Attachment Theory in Practice, which like if you're not a therapist, it's probably not going to be interesting to you, but if you are, check it out. Um, And so it could be because I'm reading that book, but it reminded me of attachment theory, how like these two people are like
Mm.
melding and it's like the colorful part of the music video. Everything else is in black and white until
Yeah.
a little bit later, I think, or that might be the only time it's in
I
color.
think I think that's the only time we see color in the video.
So yeah, I thought that was super cool. And then I also thought it was cool that there's color when you tell your story.
Oh, oh, I love that. I love that so much.
So it didn't feel right to like notice those things and not
Hmm.
talk about them on this
Hmm.
podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that we talked about that. I love your insights. I think those were really good. And also, let's just name for a minute that psychiatric hospitals are important and they're necessary. And when you are in need of respite, it is a place to go to get respite.
Yeah.
It's a place to get treatment. And they're not cold, they're not sterile. And I'm not ruling out that there aren't those kinds of hospitals too, because I'm not saying every one of them is like perfect, but it is should be an environment in which you feel like you can come and go, you can care for yourself, like anything that's removed is for your own safety. And it can actually be really helpful to have structure, right? Like your meals are structured, your time is structured, your sleep is structured, all things that are really hard to do when you're in a dark place. So um, hospitals are good and necessary places to go when we need them.
Yeah. 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 It's a good description. Keep people safe. So, all right. That's all I wanted to say. I just needed to note that stuff.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We're happy you're here. Feel free to join us as we dive into another episode. If you want to stay connected with us, follow us on Instagram at Therate Podcast. You can also request songs for us to cover by emailing us at theratepodcast@gmail.com. We've also created playlists on Spotify to listen to our songs that we cover, and it's linked on our Instagram. Thank you, Jeremy, for editing this podcast.